The match. Rhonda, what happened to your face? Rhonda lifted her hand to her cheek, feeling a dull ache but not realizing it was visible. She had seen a slight redness earlier, assuming it would fade soon. She didn't reply to her friend, instead walking towards the restroom mirror. There, she was met with a startling sight of a dark bruise along her cheekbone. Her friend came in after her. Did Alan do this to you? Did he hit you? Daisy, that's absurd. You know my husband. He would never strike anyone, especially not me. Then how did you get that bruise? It was my own doing, Rhonda fibbed. I was putting away a heavy bowl in the cabinet, and it slipped and struck me. I'm just shocked it left such a mark. Daisy's skeptical expression made it clear she wasn't convinced. Come on, I've seen this before. A friend in college had a similar mark from an abusive relationship. Don't lie to me, who did this to you? Rhonda hesitated, torn between honesty and maintaining her story. I'm sticking to my story, she quipped, attempting to diffuse the tension. I assure you, no one is hurting me. It was just an accident, please drop it. Despite her frustration, Daisy recalled a college friend who also hesitated to acknowledge abuse and chose not to press further. All right, I'll let it go for now, but if it recurs, I won't stay quiet. I'm serious, Rhonda. It won't happen again. I've made sure of that, Rhonda assured her. Daisy left, and Rhonda attempted to cover the mark with makeup, but with limited success. Throughout the day, she noticed lingering looks from others. After work, Rhonda hoped to arrive home before her husband, who ran a successful photography business and had recently hired an assistant, Michelle. Michelle was outgoing and quick to learn, taking on significant responsibilities and allowing Steve, Rhonda's husband, to sometimes come home early. Her heart skipped a beat when she opened the garage door to find his SUV back in its place. Great, she muttered under her breath, realizing Daisy hadn't been fooled by her fibs. She prayed Steve hadn't caught on to her fabricated tale about a college friend in distress, either. Her initial strategy was to claim a sudden need for the restroom as soon as she entered, hoping to buy time to cover up her bruise with makeup. She'd then reappear, ready to greet Steve with a warm embrace as if nothing was amiss. But luck wasn't on her side. Steve was just heading upstairs, meeting her right at the entrance. Before she knew it, she was wrapped in his embrace, his face inching closer to hers. They were moments away from a kiss when he paused, concern etching his features. Honey, what happened to you? He inquired, scrutinizing her more closely. Thanks to her earlier run-in with Daisy, she was armed with a plausible excuse. Striving for nonchalance, she replied, Oh, it was a silly accident at the restaurant during lunch. I went to the restroom, and as I was leaving, I noticed my shoe strap was loose. I bent down to fix it, and just then, someone swung the door open, hitting me right on the cheek. It was quite a shock, but I assured the lady it was all my fault for not paying attention. Ouch, that sounds painful, he sympathized, planting a soft kiss on her lips before suggesting she sit while he fetched some ice. Seated on the sofa, she felt a wave of relief wash over her as he seemed to accept her explanation without question. When he returned, he tenderly applied an ice pack to her cheek, comforting her with his gentle touch. With her eyes closed, she allowed herself a small, relieved sigh, finally putting the chapter with Tony to rest. She acknowledged internally that it was a mistake from the start, one that had been eating away at her conscience. Now, feeling a sense of peace, she was determined to reconnect with Steve, to rekindle their intimacy. Later, after dinner, as Steve delved into his novel in his recliner, Rhonda headed upstairs. Not long after, her voice floated down, calling him to the bedroom, hinting at a romantic setup. Leaving his book behind, Steve felt a surge of anticipation, the novel's climax forgotten in favor of the real-life enchantment awaiting him in their candlelit room. Rhonda positioned herself in the far corner of the room, allowing him a full view of the burgundy nightgown he had given her on Valentine's Day. She approached him with a graceful stride, a mischievous smile playing on her lips as she began to unfasten his shirt. Do you think you could help me out? I've got this annoying itch, she teased. Of course, I'm always here to address your concerns, he replied with a playful wink. Rhonda chuckled at his witty comeback. I think we might just solve each other's problems, she murmured, sliding his shirt off and letting it fall to the ground. She then knelt and started to loosen his trousers, saying, I'm pretty sure I can take care of that issue for you. Steve felt a surge of anticipation as she helped him step out of his pants. It seems you do care, she said with a light-hearted taunt. Steve groaned softly, enjoying the gentle and attentive way she was with him. He was overwhelmed by the sensations, feeling unsteady on his feet. Rhonda then moved to the bed, glancing back at him with a playful invitation in her eyes. He approached, seeing her anticipation and desire. They connected with ease, both sighing in the comfort and pleasure of the moment. Steve leaned down, gently caressing her, eliciting joyful sounds from Rhonda. She expressed her enjoyment more vocally, urging him to continue. Their expressions of ecstasy filled the room, each moment intensifying until Steve reached the peak of his pleasure, his release marked by a deep, satisfied sound. Rhonda responded in kind, moving in harmony with him. Eventually, Steve lay beside her, both catching their breath in the quiet aftermath. After a short pause, Steve spoke with a hint of regret. I'm sorry, I got too carried away. Rhonda just smiled and cuddled closer, whispering, Don't worry, it was perfect. Don't worry about it. You don't need to apologize. It's not necessary for things to be perfect every time. The night is still young, and I'm confident you'll have me in rapture soon enough." "That's the plan," he agreed. They shared a cascade of gentle kisses, and soon Steve felt a renewed energy. He gently took his wife's hand, caressing her palm soothingly. Her soft sighs began almost immediately, and he playfully kissed her fingertips, knowing just how to kindle her excitement. Rhonda closed her eyes, relishing the tender and warm sensations spreading through her. Steve, with care, positioned himself beside her, whispering sweet nothings and kissing her neck, gradually moving with deliberate attention to her sensitive areas. "Oh, yes," she sighed, her body responding naturally to his touch. He had a way of making her feel cherished and adored, making up for any earlier shortcomings. "Incredible," she gasped, her body reacting with intense pleasure to his devoted affection. Steve watched, filled with affection, as Rhonda expressed her joy and pleasure, a testament to their deep connection. It was just the beginning of a night filled with loving and passionate moments. "Come here, lie beside me," she said, catching her breath. Steve moved next to her, feeling an intense connection. Rhonda, with a loving gesture, guided them closer together, moving with a rhythm that spoke of deep intimacy. They both felt the crescendo of their shared affection rapidly approaching. "Just let it happen," she whispered, a look of deep affection in her eyes. With that, they reached a blissful harmony, their mutual affection evident in their synchronized joy. Rhonda gently rested, maintaining their close connection, savoring the lingering bond. Once the moment passed, she relaxed beside him, both catching their breath. "That was wonderful," she exhaled. "Absolutely amazing," he responded, his voice filled with contentment. Lying there, their smiles wide, they embraced the warmth of the moment before drifting into a contented sleep. "What's happening?" Initially, Steve thought he was still dreaming, his mind sluggish to comprehend the disturbance. He cracked open an eye, glancing at the nightstand where his phone was lit up. It wasn't the alarm, that was a different kind of nuisance, and it was still pitch dark in the room. He swung his legs off the bed, feeling his wife shift beside him. "Steve, what's going on?" "Not sure yet," he replied, grabbing his phone. "Someone's calling at this time." "Hello," he muttered into the phone. Moments later, Steve sprang up, exclaiming, "I'll be there in 25 minutes. "Steve, what is it? What happened?" his wife asked, filled with concern. "Someone attempted to vandalize the studio," he said urgently. "The police and fire brigade are already there. I'm coming with you. Quick, get ready, we need to leave now." Luckily, the roads were clear at 3 in the morning. Approaching, they saw the flashing emergency lights. A gray-haired police officer introduced himself as Sergeant Jurgens when they arrived. "I'm Steve Hodges, the owner, and this is my wife, Rhonda." Steve was clearly upset. "Is it bad?" "No, not much damage. It's just at the back near the alley. Let me show you." Indeed, the building was mostly unharmed except for some minor damage at the back. Steve was puzzled. The sergeant seemed overly concerned for such minimal damage. He sensed that Sergeant Jurgens wanted a private word with him, away from Rhonda. Knowing she didn't have her keys, he gave her his. "Could you check inside the studio with one of the officers? Make sure everything's intact. I'll join you shortly after I finish up here." "Sure, dear." A female officer nearby heard them and offered to go with Rhonda. "Okay, Sergeant, what's going on?" Steve asked once they were alone. "Well, sir, is there anyone who might have a grudge against you, perhaps because of a misunderstanding with some of the models?" The inquiry was deeply offensive, and Steve didn't hold back his frustration. "Absolutely not, Sergeant," he retorted with vehemence. "I maintain professional boundaries with the models and everyone else. What about you? Do you get overly familiar with your colleagues, like those working with my wife?" "I haven't checked. Are they married?" "Calm down," the officer responded gruffly. "I get your point, but someone has a problem with you, and we need the whole story. I'm being honest. It might have been just a prank by some youngsters." "I'm not convinced," the officer said, glancing back. "Ray," he shouted to a firefighter nearby, "could you bring that item here for Mr. Hodges to see?" "You know I can't, Sarge. It's under lock and key." "Ray, come on, it's hardly a high-tech device. It's not going to explode. Maybe Hodges can spot something that points to the culprit." Ray was reluctant, aware of the rules, but conceded. He brought over a burnt box with wires protruding. "What's this?" "A homemade explosive device. Luckily, the person who made it botched the job. It burned up rather than detonated." "A bomb," Steve whispered in disbelief. "I genuinely have no clue who would do this." "Really, no idea?" the sergeant pressed, skeptical. "People usually know their adversaries." "I honestly don't know." The sergeant, with over 2 decades of experience, usually had a good read on people. Sensing Steve's sincerity, his attitude softened. "Okay, I apologize for the earlier remark about the models. I'm just seeking the truth, for your safety." "I appreciate it," Steve said. "But please, don't mention this to my wife. I don't want her to be frightened." "That's not advisable," the sergeant advised. "I get you want to protect her, but she might be in danger too. We need to inform her so she can be cautious." Steve sighed deeply, acknowledging the point. "You're probably right." Upon entering the studio, they found Rhonda and the policewoman concluding their search. "Sweetheart, from our observations, it seems like there was no break-in. Everything's intact, and as far as we can tell, nothing's been taken," Rhonda remarked. "Thank you, dear, and you too, officer," he replied. "Honey, the sergeant here suspects this wasn't just some trivial prank. It seems like someone may have a grudge against me. Who could that be?" "I'm clueless," he answered, his head shaking in bewilderment. "It's probably trivial, but until we figure this out, I want you to stay alert. Avoid getting close to unfamiliar vehicles, and maybe it's safer to have lunch with someone or just eat at the office." "Really? It's for your safety, Mrs. Hodges," the sergeant chimed in. Rhonda paused, absorbing the scene. "What are you not disclosing?" "It looks like there was an attempt to set off an explosive device, dear." "What? Are you certain?" "Yes," Steve confirmed with a subdued nod. "It was a failed attempt, but it caused the fire." Feeling her knees weaken, Rhonda sat down while the sergeant discussed further with her husband. "Do you have any surveillance cameras, Mr. Hodges?" "Well, inside the office, yes. I activate them at night. There's a silent alarm connected to your station, but I haven't installed any outside." "Understood. Given your line of work, setting up a few concealed cameras outside should be straightforward for you." "That's a solid suggestion. I'll get on it tomorrow." "Great. The fire crew might have left, but expect a fire inspector by tomorrow morning," he noted, turning to the female officer. "Ready to go, Officer Dar?" "Yes, Sergeant," she replied. With nothing more to be done, Steve and Rhonda went home. It was 4:30 when they arrived. Heading straight for the kitchen, Rhonda declared, "I won't be sleeping anymore tonight. I'm going to brew some coffee." "Count me in for a cup," said Steve, settling in front of the computer to browse security cameras. The prices varied significantly, but he was interested in additional features: wireless operation, weather resistance, night vision, and infrared capabilities for clear night images, plus ease of installation given his limited technical expertise. He shortlisted 3 models that seemed appropriate. He was still engrossed in his research when Rhonda approached and stood beside him, draping an arm around his shoulder to peer at the screen. "What are you looking at?" "I'm trying to figure out the best security cameras to install soon. Just checking who sells them nearby." "Coffee's brewed." "Thanks, dear. I'll join you in a bit." She affectionately kissed his cheek before walking away. "Thanks, dear," he called out, then sat with his wife in the kitchen, engaging in light-hearted conversation until they both laughed at the alarm ringing from the other room. "Guess it's time to start the day," Steve quipped. Before heading to work, Steve reminded Rhonda to stay cautious. Yet, by noon, she had slipped back into her routine, leaving work early to beat the rush. While unlocking her car, she was abruptly spun around, a man's firm grip on her wrist. She faced him, her eyes wide with shock. "Tony, stop, you're hurting me." He silenced her protest with a forceful hand. "You didn't listen yesterday. We're going to my place." She struggled against him as he tried to pull her towards his car. That's when they heard a shout, "Rhonda, everything all right?" The person from the building had noticed her distress. "Hey, let her go." "Just walk away," Tony snarled back. The bystander retreated but quickly returned with 2 others, including a security guard. Tony released Rhonda and fled as they approached. Rhonda was nursing her wrist when the trio reached her. The guard immediately asked, "Are you all right?" "Yes, thanks to you all." Tim, a colleague who first noticed the commotion, asked, "Are you okay?" "Who was that man?" "I don't know him," she fibbed, "just some oddball, I suppose." After expressing her gratitude, she invited Tim to lunch, insisting on picking up the tab. She was wary of being alone again, uncertain if Tony was still lurking nearby. Throughout lunch and the day, Rhonda was puzzled by Tony's erratic behavior. After all, their encounters had been brief and infrequent. Now, she sported a faint mark on her wrist, complementing the one on her face, though it was hardly noticeable unless closely examined. Earlier, as Steve unlocked the studio, he felt uneasy and surveyed the area cautiously. When Michelle arrived shortly after, he briefed her on the unsettling events and inquired if she had seen anything suspicious. Despite her assurances of normalcy, he sensed her anxiety. "Michelle, maybe you should take the day off. Just relax at home, and don't worry, I'll handle everything here and ensure you're compensated." "Steve, we've got 3 sessions scheduled today." "I'm staying," she insisted. Despite his feigned frustration, Steve was relieved she stayed, aware of the hectic day ahead and the invaluable assistance she provided. While preparing for the first session, a man entered, prompting Steve to instinctively protect Michelle. His concern faded when the man introduced himself as Pat Sorensen, an inspector from the Chicago Fire Department's arson squad, investigating a recent incident at the studio. Steve explained, "Yes, Mr. Sorensen, there was an attempted attack here. The evidence is clear. It was a poorly executed attempt." Pat detailed the amateurish method used, which resulted in a fire instead of the intended explosion. Questioned about potential suspects, Steve expressed his cluelessness, noting their clientele comprised mainly advertising agencies, not the general public. Turning to Michelle, the inspector inquired, "Do you have any idea who might want to sabotage the studio?" She confidently answered, "Not a clue." "All right, I'm heading to the back to take a closer look. I'll be taking lots of photos and checking everything thoroughly to ensure nothing was overlooked last night. I'll touch base with you again before I leave. If you recall anything that might aid our investigation, please jot it down to ensure you remember it." "Understood, Inspector, and thank you," Steve responded. During dinner, Rhonda and Steve discussed their day. Rhonda inquired about any updates on the recent scare, and Steve shared his interaction with the fire inspector, omitting his conversation with Rhonda about her day. Rhonda mentioned only the company's success in exceeding their quarterly goals, omitting any personal encounters. Steve talked about ordering new outdoor cameras to enhance their security, planning to set them up once they arrived. The next day, Daisy was eagerly waiting at the office for Rhonda. Upon Rhonda's arrival, Daisy immediately asked, "What's the scoop? I heard you had a rough time yesterday. You need to fill me in, and don't try to brush it off." Rhonda, hesitant but trusting in Daisy, agreed to share the details over lunch at Plato's place. Rhonda found it hard to focus at work, anticipating her conversation with Daisy. She felt the weight of her secret and hoped that sharing it might bring some solace. Once they were alone, Daisy pressed for details, intuiting that Rhonda's troubles involved a personal relationship. "I can tell something's up. If it wasn't Steve who caused you distress, then who?" Rhonda, feeling the pressure, confirmed Daisy's suspicion but made her swear to secrecy. She confessed to ending things with the person in question, regretting the whole affair. "Is it someone I know?" Daisy prodded. Rhonda, speaking softly, assured her it wasn't. "You have to promise not to breathe a word of this to anyone. It's Tony Belshaw. We met through a mutual acquaintance." Daisy responded with a hint of sarcasm. "Great introduction, huh?" Rhonda explained her initial impression of Tony, describing him as charming, humorous, and carrying a mysteriously edgy vibe, but now seen through a lens of regret and caution. Daisy tried to maintain an open mind, but found herself puzzled. "Rhonda, I can't grasp how you ended up in such a situation, especially with someone like Steve waiting for you at home." Rhonda replied with a sigh, "I know, it really wasn't my intention from the start. The encounter was aggressive. I was at Carl's diner, dining alone, when he noticed me. He just sat down without asking and quickly made advances. I needed a moment to think about how to handle the situation. I never planned on anything intimate, yet there was an undeniable attraction. I excused myself to the restroom to gather my thoughts, planning to assert that I was happily married and not interested, but he confronted me in the corridor. He was forceful, restraining my arms and kissing me forcefully. Then he restrained my hands with one of his while lifting my skirt with the other. It was a very invasive and unwelcome touch. Rhonda, why didn't you scream for help? I should have acted immediately, but I froze in fear, unsure of how to respond to such an unexpected ordeal. He must have noticed my fear, which seemed to encourage him further. You should have defended yourself. I was too shocked to think clearly. So, what happened next? Rhonda paused, clearly struggling with the memory. Despite the fear, there was a confusing excitement. He misinterpreted my physical reaction as consent and dragged me into a secluded area, where I felt paralyzed and couldn't resist as he continued his advances. Rhonda, how could you just? Daisy halted, noticing the distress on her friend's face. I was so caught off guard and overwhelmed. His forceful demeanor left me feeling powerless. Rhonda, you should have reported him. It feels too late now, Rhonda murmured. Is that when he became violent? Rhonda negated with a shake of her head. This was months ago. That's why I feel it's too late now. Daisy was struggling to connect the dots. If the incident occurred so long ago, why had he confronted her so aggressively just days before? Suddenly, it hit her. You haven't been close with him. Not after everything. Yes, she responded. I'm aware of how improper it was, but it was thrilling at first. His assertive nature was overwhelming. I felt powerless. How could anyone fault me for not being able to resist? It felt like a game, or so I thought. But Tony took it much more seriously. He had access to a friend's apartment where he could go during the day. It's close by. About a week after our first encounter at the restaurant, he waited for me in the parking lot during lunch. He led me to the apartment. He was just as intense there, but at least we had a bed and some privacy. The first time there, he had me undress while he watched. It was unsettling. My hands trembled as I removed my clothes. Once I was undressed, he asked me to stand still for a moment, just looking at me. After undressing himself, our encounter was intimate and direct. Despite my feelings, I found myself responding physically. Rhonda, her friend, could only respond in shock. I know. The guilt afterward was overwhelming. Why did he confront you like that? Well, we met a few more times after that, but he began acting possessively, claiming he had rights over me. It was unnerving. I wasn't sure if he was serious or just playing a part, but I decided to end things with him. The next time he approached me, I told him I was busy and couldn't meet. I don't know if that angered him, but the following day he demanded I meet his friend as a favor for using the apartment. Then he forbade me from seeing Steve. Can you believe that? What did you do? I was too scared to respond directly. I thought avoiding him would send a message. So, I started parking on the street and using a different entrance to the building. That worked until the other day. That's when he confronted you. Yes, he cornered me at Denny's. He appeared out of nowhere, furious, demanding to know why I'd been avoiding him and not replying to his messages. I told him it was over, that I wouldn't be manipulated. That's when he got physical. Thankfully, a waitress saw and intervened, and later, a kind patron escorted me to my car. What are you going to do? After what happened in the parking lot yesterday, it seems like he's not ready to back down. I'm not sure, and now there might be an even bigger issue. The other night, someone attempted to sabotage Steve's studio. What? Is he okay? Yes, it happened around 3 in the morning. We were asleep when we got the call from the police. The attempt failed, but I can only suspect one person behind it. Are you thinking of Tony? Who else? Steve doesn't have any adversaries. Tony is the only one with a possible motive. Oh, Rhonda, you must report this to the authorities. He could target Steve directly next time, or even you. I'm torn, I understand I need to speak to the police, but then Steve will learn about my indiscretion, and my marriage could end. Oh, she looked up, tears in her eyes. Why did I let this happen? It was such a foolish mistake. Daisy was at a loss for words. Her friend was suffering, a consequence of her actions. While she felt she should empathize, part of her thought, you're responsible for this. She reached out and held Rhonda's hand. The truth will surface, you know that. Rhonda nodded, her tears flowing more freely, making it hard to speak. Dear, it's better if Steve doesn't hear this from the police. It would only worsen things. You need to confess. If you remain silent and something happens to Steve, you'll never forgive yourself. I realize that. God, Daisy, I never imagined betraying Steve. I'm in such a terrible place. I'm terrified of losing him, she said, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. I wish I could offer some comfort, Rhonda, but you've made a grave error, and now you must confront the fallout. I understand, she sniffled. I'll talk to him tonight. Oh, Daisy, I'm petrified. I fear my marriage won't make it. Daisy exhaled deeply, her voice tinged with resignation. I'm at a loss for words, Rhonda. Considering everything you've shared, it seems like the truth will surface eventually. It might be wise to address it proactively. Rhonda, tears still streaking her face, pleaded, could you cover for me at the office? Say I felt unwell and had to leave. I just can't face going back there now. I need some time to think things through. Of course, Rhonda. Do you think you'll be back at work tomorrow? I'm not sure, Rhonda replied, her tone uncertain. It all hinges on how tonight unfolds. After settling their bill, they parted ways. Rhonda was overwhelmed by a profound sense of apprehension, unlike anything she had felt before. Returning home, Rhonda couldn't bring herself to engage in domestic routines or attempts at reconciliation. She dismissed the idea of preparing a meal as a trivial gesture that would trivialize her actions. Instead, she wrestled with how to manage her emotions and the impending conversation. The thought of maintaining composure and demonstrating her resolve to change weighed heavily against the raw expression of her regret and sorrow. She questioned how Steve would interpret her demeanor. Would he view her strength as insensitivity? Rhonda's heart was heavy as she pondered the impact of her actions on their relationship and on Steve's emotions. The role reversal tormented her, imagining the pain she would feel if the situation were reversed. She felt paralyzed by the thought of their impending conversation, unable to conceive of a way to mitigate the damage. The clock showed 4 in the afternoon, and Rhonda's thoughts turned to the mundane task of dinner. However, her overwhelming emotions led her to consider reaching out to Steve via text, sidestepping the immediate need to confront their issues directly. Hi, honey, heard anything new today? Steve's prompt reply caught her off guard, as he was often too busy for immediate responses. Hey, not much news here. How about we get a pizza tonight? I'm not really up for cooking, Rhonda texted back, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Steve agreed, offering to pick up the pizza on his way home, unaware of the storm brewing in Rhonda's heart. Can I get you anything from the pharmacy? No thanks, dear. I'm not feeling the best, but it's nothing serious. Love you. Love you too. Daisy was a little taken aback to see her friend at work the next day. I thought you might take the day off, she murmured, leading Rhonda to a secluded part of the room. What happened? I just couldn't go through with it. I got cold feet. Well, maybe that's for the best, Daisy consoled. Come with me. She guided Rhonda to the restroom, quickly checking each stall to ensure privacy before continuing. I had a chat with my daughter last night. She's a legal assistant. She mentioned you could file for a protective order. It's straightforward, just a few forms to download and submit at the county clerk's office. After you file, send a message to the guy, warning him about the order and that he could be arrested if he troubles you or Steve again. I'm sure he won't risk it, especially if he realizes arrest is a possibility. You could even hint that you suspect he was behind the sabotage at Steve's studio. But I'm not certain about that. You've said Steve has no adversaries. Who else could it be? It's worth attempting. I promise if I can preserve my marriage, I won't ever consider anyone else as long as I live. Later, Rhonda informed HR she was still unwell and requested to leave early, aiming to arrive home before Steve. At home, she quickly downloaded the necessary forms, filled them out, and placed them in her bag. She then searched for the nearest court's location. The next day, she called in sick again to submit the paperwork, finding the building easily. Inside, she was directed to the clerk's office. Her heart raced as she waited in line, silently pleading for success with each step forward. Rhonda approached and placed the documents on the counter. Yes, I need to submit these and request a restraining order, she said anxiously to the elderly woman at the desk. The clerk quickly reviewed the forms and returned them to Rhonda. Please go to the gate over there, she instructed, pointing the way. Someone will assist you shortly. After expressing her gratitude, Rhonda made her way to the gate as the clerk called for Aaron. A tall man in his 30s opened the gate and guided Rhonda to his desk. "How can I assist you today?" he inquired as they sat down. Rhonda hesitated before answering. "There's a man causing trouble for me and my husband. I need a restraining order against him." "Are these the affidavits?" Aaron asked, referring to the documents in her hand. Flustered, Rhonda replied, "Oh, yes, sorry," and handed over the papers. "Let's take a look, Ms. Hodges," he said, starting to read through the documents. Mid-sentence, he paused. "Alan Hodges. Your husband, is he a photographer?" Feeling her heart sink, Rhonda was astounded by the coincidence in such a large city. Nervously, she confirmed, "Yes, he is," before she could stop herself. Now on edge, she inquired, "How did you know?" "My wife models part-time. She's worked with him before and always speaks highly of his professionalism," Aaron explained. Rhonda managed a tense smile, relieved that Aaron's connection to her husband was innocent. "Sorry for the digression," Aaron apologized, returning to the topic. "Has this Tony physically threatened you or your husband?" Rhonda hesitated, remembering her earlier statement to the police about an unrelated incident, and decided not to bring that up. "He once slapped me, not too harshly, but it was alarming. I didn't tell my husband because I didn't want to escalate the situation." "Understood," Aaron noted on the form. "Anything else you'd like to add?" "Just that incident, but he's been relentless," Rhonda replied. "How do you know him?" "He's an acquaintance from a friend's circle. He approached me during a lunch outing and has been troubling me since, insisting on unwelcome advances." "Has he ever directly confronted or threatened your husband?" Rhonda's ordeal painted a clear picture of her harassment without delving into explicit details, focusing instead on the need for protection and the emotional toll it took on her. "No, I don't believe he would dare, but I prefer not to risk it." "Ms. Hodges, is Steve aware that this man is bothering you?" "No, I'm concerned he might confront him and end up in trouble. I'd be grateful if you kept this between us." "Absolutely," he confirmed. "I'll file this with the 3rd District Court first thing tomorrow. Anthony Balshaw will be prohibited from coming within 100 feet of you or Steve. Should he approach you, immediately call emergency services, and he will be apprehended for harassment." She felt an immense relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. "Thank you, Mr. Aaron Nelson. And my wife's name is Peggy, just in case." Rhonda expressed her gratitude once more and left, feeling a significant improvement in her spirits. She eagerly sent a message to her harasser, "I've obtained a restraining order against you. If you get within 100 feet of me, you'll be arrested. Avoid trouble and stay away." Feeling relieved by the lack of response, she thought, "I owe Daisy a lunch." Daisy greeted Rhonda warmly at work the next day, expressing concern. "So, did you manage to get the restraining order?" "Yes, I did," Rhonda answered brightly. "Lunch is on me today, for you and your daughter, if she can join. Heavy works downtown, she won't make it, but I'm in," Daisy replied with a smile. "Have you messaged him yet?" "I texted him. No response yet, so I'm hoping that's the end of it." "That's good. You're serious about steering clear of men now, right?" "Absolutely, Rhonda declared, raising her hand as if taking an oath. "I've learned my lesson, no more mistakes." By day's end, Rhonda hadn't heard back from him, which left her feeling triumphant. Arriving home, she was humming in the kitchen when Steve came in. He laughed, seeing her joy. "Someone's in a great mood," he remarked. She approached him, embracing him warmly, and gazed into his eyes. "And why shouldn't I be, with you as my husband?" she replied, giving him a tender kiss. Rhonda was eager for a close evening with Steve following their dinner, feeling a strong desire to reconnect and affirm her commitment to their union. Despite Steve's obliviousness to her inner turmoil, Rhonda felt it crucial to express her loyalty to him. That night, they shared an intense connection, experiencing mutual satisfaction, albeit for different reasons. Rhonda's radiant mood didn't go unnoticed at work, her continuous smile fueled by their intimate evenings. Tony, once a figure in her past, faded from her thoughts until a sudden text message disrupted her peace. While at her desk, the buzz of her phone eventually prompted Rhonda to check a shocking image sent to her. The picture, attempting to compromise her, showed her face with an unfamiliar figure in a compromising position. Convinced of its falsity and suspecting Tony's handiwork, despite his denial, she felt a surge of anger and disbelief. Tony's coy suggestion for a face-to-face meeting left Rhonda seething with frustration, recognizing his manipulative intent. That evening, her silence and preoccupation sparked Steve's concern, but she dismissed it as work-related stress. Restless yet resolute, Rhonda devised a plan early next morning. With Steve away, she prepared to record any incriminating evidence by familiarizing herself with his digital recorder, a tool that might help her expose Tony's deceit and safeguard her marriage. When Rhonda arrived at work, she sought help from her friend. Daisy hesitated, fearing unwanted attention, but Rhonda reassured her it would be fine. By midday, Rhonda was anxiously seated in Plato's place, awaiting her antagonist. She discreetly activated her recorder when he arrived. His presence was unsettling as he confidently approached and sat down, ignoring the lone woman nearby. Rhonda greeted him in a hushed tone. "You really are despicable, aren't you?" He smirked. "Hand over your purse." "Why do you need my purse?" "Just give it to me," he insisted. "No, I won't hand over my purse." "Hand it over, or I'll send compromising photos to your husband before he returns tonight." Anticipating this, Rhonda hesitantly gave him her purse. At the top was her phone, recording. Tony, thinking he'd caught her, turned off the device with a triumphant smile. Rhonda feigned disappointment as Tony mocked her attempt at recording their chat and returned her purse. She hid her satisfaction, remembering her husband's detective novel tactics. The best hiding place is in plain sight, with a decoy up front. That photo won't affect me, she confidently told Tony. My husband, being a photographer, will spot a forgery instantly. I doubt it. I hired a skilled artist for that photo. It's undetectable, he boasted. Then the waitress arrived. Rhonda ordered a salad, Tony just a coffee. Once alone again, Rhonda firmly stated, Tony, I won't be your slave. My comment, Part 2 ending coming tomorrow. Would you keep a woman like Rhonda around you? Do you think she will change? Comment down below, sub and bell, and we will see how she behaves in the ending.